Good afternoon, everybody. We are live with this session of Conversations with the Council, and thank you so much for joining us. I'll ask our guests to unmute their microphones, and I'll go ahead and introduce everybody. I'm Jenny Bowersfeld. I'm with Lacey's Public Affairs Department, and I have the pleasure of being joined by our Mayor Andy Ryder.
Hi.
And Councilmember Malcolm Miller.
Hello.
Our City Manager Scott Spence.
How you doing?
And our Interim Chief of Police, Robert Almeida.
Good evening.
So thank you guys so much for being here. And for all of you who are joining us, whether it's through Zoom or on one of our social media accounts, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We have an important conversation ahead of us today, and we are all eager to be a part of it. And I'm super grateful for our panel to be available and willing to share their information and perspectives on what we're going to be talking about. So as everybody knows, our entire nation has been trying to process the heartbreaking and intolerable death of George Floyd that happened several weeks back. And it has led to demonstrations and protests throughout the nation against the use of excessive force by police officers, as well as in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And we've had a lot of people reaching out, a lot of our citizens reaching out to us through email and phone calls and social media to know what Lacey is doing, what our Lacey Police Department is doing to ensure that training and accountability is in place. So we wanted to start out by talking with Chief Almeida and hearing from him. Chief, can you share a little bit about some information that would address some of the concerns out there that we've been receiving around this topic, and just also touch a little bit about our police department and how we operate?
Certainly. Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate that. So first, I want to start off with it's important to know that the Lacey Police Department is deeply ingrained in the community, is made up of community members. A majority of our officers were born and raised in Lacey, have lived in Lacey, currently live in Lacey, and have strong ties to the community. Because of that, it's a very community-based policing organization. And because of that, it's a little bit different than other places. And you'll see that flavor. You're more likely to see our officers involved in acts of helping people, talking to folks, and just generally interacting with folks on a day-to-day activity versus an enforcement action. With that being said, our officers are trained to de-escalate conflict, all sorts of conflict. And that's really a different way of doing things, and something we really stressed here. So if an officer has an encounter with somebody and we work to de-escalate the conflict, and if force is used, we use the minimal amount of force necessary to control the situation. And then that use of force is documented very heavily and reviewed at several levels to ensure that it was appropriate, it was necessary, and we used the least amount of force possible. That being said, we only had 57 uses of force last year out of almost 2,000 arrests. That's a little over 4% of all arrests result in some type of use of force. And the types of force that we used were really minimal. And again, we had nobody hospitalized behind it, no arrestees were hospitalized, no officers were hospitalized due to injury. It's really a testament to the level of care that we put into our activities. Another difference that we do when we train is about accountability. And our officers are trained to have a duty to intervene. So if they see misconduct by another officer, they don't just have a duty to report it, they have a duty to intervene and prevent that activity from occurring. So very different what you've seen on the news or on video in other places. Our officers are really take that to heart here. And we are definitely part of the community, and that's how we treat each other. Our officers have had over 4,000 hours of training in the last 5 years, dealing with implicit bias training, racial diversity training, de-escalation, minimal use of force, first aid, and duty to intervene, and those type of topics, really ingraining in our folks the need to use minimal amounts of force and to not use domination, if you would, which is really kind of the old style policing. We're much more into talking to our folks and gaining compliance from the person rather than forcing the situation.
Well,
also, officers, before they use force, tell the person, listen, I need you to go along with the program, or else I'm going to have to use force. Giving that person the opportunity to comply with what's going on. And lastly, what I'll just speak to is the initiative called 8 Can't Wait. So there's an initiative called 8 Can't Wait where there are 8 policies that, if enacted, are believed to reduce the possibility of a violent outcome from the police encounter by about 70%. And among those are banning the use of chokeholds and strangleholds, requiring de-escalation training, requiring a warning before using shooting or force, exhausting all means before shooting, the duty to intervene, like I spoke to already, banning a shooting and moving vehicles, requiring the use of force on a continuum, meaning from starting from minimal to the use of lethal force, and then also requiring comprehensive reporting and documentation and review of any use of force. And the Lacey Police Department really embraces all those fundamentals. So it's very gratifying to see that other agencies are starting to follow our lead on these points. So that just gives you a small glimpse into the Lacey Police Department. And also,
Chief, if I may, really quick, I think it's important to mention too, that yes, I think that our community is in full support of our police department. I mean, you guys have seen an outpouring of support and encouraging words and treats.
Very true.
So I just wanted to mention that because I think it's important. Our police department does a fantastic job. And I think these questions are just coming out of the duty that people feel to take action. But I think it's important to state that our police department is top notch. So I just wanted to recognize that.
I really appreciate you bringing that up. So seeing what's going on across the country, we think we do a good job, but we just want to do that much better. And frankly, be really transparent in how we do our jobs.
Right.
So we created the accountability measures section of the website. And in that section, you'll see that we list out, for example, the racial diversity of our department. We list out our use of force policy. We list out how we use force, how we document force. We talk about the training that our officers receive. We talk about the 8 Can't Wait initiative. And so we keep adding articles to our website in the accountability measures section to really be transparent, to let people have that faith in the police department that we're doing it the right way, the way that we embrace the values of the community and that we are reflective of the community. We got a couple of slides to show you, if we can put those up real quick.
Yep, just 1 second here.
So just real briefly, I promise not to kill you with PowerPoint, but just a couple things to show you. So this is the 2014-2018 American Community Survey, which shows the racial composition of the city of Lacey. You'll notice it's about 73%, 3/4 are basically white folks, and the rest, about 1/4 are various people of color and minorities, like myself. And you can see African American, it's about 5.5%, and then through the other percentages. Next slide, please. And this is the racial composition of the Lacey Police Department, your police department. Again, you'll notice about 70% white, but you'll notice the African American, the black section, we're almost twice of what the city of Lacey is. Also, really good representation in the other minority groups.
Right.
Next slide, please. So just going through just a quick analysis of our 2019 field activity. So field interviews, when we go out and talk to somebody, we write a field interview card. Again, pretty representative of the racial makeup of the city as far as proportionality. Next slide, please. Again, with traffic infractions, again, pretty representative of the racial makeup of the city. You'll hear the term driving while black. It's not really reflective here. People aren't stopped for their color, as this indicates. It's reflective proportionally of what you see in our community. Next slide, please. our crime victims. I think it's important to look at folks that are being victimized in town, and is that proportional or offset? And again, it's about 3/4% white and 1/4 people of color. Next slide, please. Now we look at arrests. So almost 80% of the folks we arrest are white. Of people of color, it gets a little higher though. Now we're getting up to 13.5% roughly are African American, or or collectively Black. Why is that? It seems kind of out of kilter when you look at just our population percentages. And I'll explain why that's a little different. Next slide, please. Now you look at when people call us to make a crime report, they describe the suspect in that report. And that's just their perception of how they think the person, what race they thought the person was who did that to them when they see a suspect. And now you're looking at that 12% is Black. Again, almost 70% are white, and then other persons of color. So when you look at that, it starts to kind of understand, well, wait a minute, maybe that's why officers arresting 13% are Black, because 12% of the suspects are Black. So it kind of helps to explain why there's that disparity between how come only 5% of our population is Black, but yet they're arresting 13% of Black people for crimes. Why is that? And that helps to explain it as far as how suspects are described in reports. Is that the last slide? Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So just a real quick presentation on that.
Yeah.
Is there else you'd like me to cover before we get in the next section?
No, I appreciate you sharing that information. I think it's important to show our citizens kind of the breakdown of all that information that you just shared. So I think that that's really important. Mayor or Councilmember Miller, I want to give you guys the opportunity to.
The only thing I'd add was, so if you please go to our website and you'll see our accountability measures section. It has a lot of data we're putting out there. That's just part of the data we put out. There's a lot of data out there. We're really big on transparency. And of all the letters we've been getting and all the email with good suggestions, we try to answer those questions and do that data analysis and put it up on the website. And I try to really respond to each one of those points when I get them and to find out and dig down to find the answers to those questions. So I really appreciate those thoughtful questions from the community.
You know, I just like to say I'm just very proud of our Lacey Police Department. And the statistics all show, we just went through them. But I have been receiving a lot of questions about, when are you going to implement, the 8 can't wait policies? And it feels really good to say we have already implemented these policies. And we also hear a lot of other suggestions across the United States right now of community policing, making sure your police officers are from your community. And a lot of the reasons why I think we have such a great relationship is because there's a lot of Lacey boys and girls in our Lacey Police Department. They're from this community, and when you're from Lacey, you're part of everything that's going on. And I think it's one of the reasons why the numbers look like they do. And I'm very proud of where we're at with our police department right now.
Great. Councilmember Miller, do you have any comments, or Scott?
I would just add that, and kind of what the mayor said too, I think the public needs to have confidence in their police department. And the fact that our police force does represent the community in which it serves is really a key step in making sure that we're in alignment with what we're doing in terms of the community, in terms of policing in our community. And then the fact that we're tracking key variables, I mean, that's a big part of accountability. And we are fortunate to have a very professional law enforcement force within the city of Lacey. And that's actually been a tradition, really, I'd say, for the last couple of decades. So appreciate, the chief basically highlighting some of those issues and ensuring that, we're living up to the values of a police department. I mean, it's always concerning, I think, for people, the power of government, and the police is sometimes the focus of that. And that's why I think transparency and accountability are key, especially during this time.
Just wanted to throw in there too, in the 2019 numbers, there was only one time in 2019 that a person in Lacey even had a gun pointed at them, which is pretty impressive. There was 9 incidents where a taser had to be used. and 4 incidents that involved a punch or a kick. So it seems like, the Lacey police are out there trying to use minimal force, making sure that people are being heard and that their concerns are being taken care of before any kind of escalation. I haven't seen these kinds of numbers really anywhere else, because the rest of the country is dealing with a whole lot more than this.
Yeah, agreed. And it makes me proud to live in Lacey. It makes me proud to work for Lacey. So,
Jenny, can I ask one, and then maybe not to, I think it's important to share certain things that have happened in our community that don't always get highlighted, and there's really no good way to share those stories. And maybe I can ask the chief to share a story where we had an incident that could have gone very wrong. And I think it's a testament to our police officers on how they handled that incident. I guess I asked Chief to maybe share that.
Oh, I thank you. Thanks for letting me bring that story up. I'm very proud of my officers. They do a great job, and the community should be proud of them as well. We had an incident at the McDonald's on Pacific Avenue where an African-American gentleman who was 6'7" and 300 pounds and not happy came into the McDonald's and decided to assault several of the workers, grab one worker by the throat, lift him off his feet, threw him across the room. It was a pretty good Donnybrook. My officers responded, and he was now under arrest for assault. And he saw the officers coming. He bent over, whispered to his mom. He said, "I'm going to run. When the officers chase me, I'm going to hurt him." That was his plan. And maybe in a lot of jurisdictions, that may have been the way it turned out. But our officers came, and one officer went to go handcuff him, and the guy wasn't going to have any of that, and he pulled away. And instead of my officer elevating his use of force, he stood back. And he said, let me disengage for a second. Let me reassess what's going on. This guy's only wanted for, frankly, misdemeanor assault. Let's figure out a better way to get him into handcuffs and get him into custody safely for him as well as for us. What's the best way to do this? So several officers, in turn, tried to de-escalate by building rapport with this gentleman, and wasn't working. None of it was working until one of my female officers started a dialogue with him. I was able to build rapport with the guy. Finally, he said, "Give me your hand. I trust you. I'll go with you." And she held out his hand. They held hands. They walked back to the police car. She put him in the handcuffs, sat in the back of the car. No fuss, no muss, no fight, no use of force. In a lot of other jurisdictions, they may have turned into a national story about how another Black American was brutally beaten by the police department over what? A misdemeanor assault. Pretty bad one, but a misdemeanor assault. But our officers in Lacey are trained to de-escalate whenever possible. Step away, disengage, and then try to de-escalate that situation and use the minimum amount of force possible. And this was just another illustration when that happened.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, Chief, for sharing that. I think it's important to hear real life accounts and examples of just how well trained our officers are and how well they respond in situations like that. So again, I think that our community should have the utmost confidence in our officers and the police department as a whole. So thank you so much for that. And I think, as it's kind of moving into our next part of the conversation, as important as it is to have police officers across our nation, Lacey's included, be held accountable and responsible for their actions. From the death of George Floyd, there's a larger conversation that has been sparked around racial injustice. And we didn't want to miss the opportunity to be a part of that conversation here today. So for me personally, I have been so moved to see so many people speaking out against inequality and racism and oppression, biases, etc. These are not new issues, but I think we all agree that it just feels different this time. And people, myself included, we are listening and we are learning like never before. And I think that that's really encouraging. We're taking an introspective look at our own hearts and recognizing where we can do better. So we just wanted to talk about that a little bit. And I know that the mayor, Councilmember Miller, you both have a lot of thoughts that you'd like to share on this as well. So Mayor, I'll hand it over to you if you wanted to.
Sure. Well, first I want to say that, over the past couple of weeks, this has really been the most difficult time to be an elected official, to be your mayor, or and in the 10 years I've almost been on council. You know, first we start off in mid-March, and we have to deal with COVID-19. We see, you know, all of our small businesses shut down across Lacey. People, you know, being hurt financially from that. And when you start looking into it a little bit further, you notice that, you know, people of color have been disproportionately hurt during COVID-19. And then we go on to the instance with George Floyd. And it has really been heartbreaking to see so many members of our community affected, rightfully so, by what they've seen on national television. And what's always difficult is being able to separate sort of what's going on across the nation to what's going on here in Lacey. And in one sense, I'm proud of everything that we've done in Lacey. I'm proud that we've been able to step up and help our small businesses with our Lacey emergency grant funding. You know, I'm proud of this conversation that we're having right now and the work that we put in on this issue. I first really started getting involved in racial equity issues after Ferguson, and I joined the Real Council at the national level, which stands for Race, Equity, and Leadership, and to really start understanding what tools are available for elected officials when it comes to this issue that is so difficult to talk about, especially as a white male. It's extremely difficult to have this conversation. But there has been so many social, you know, inequities across our nation that we have not come to terms with, and that we need to, because everyone should have the ability to be healthy, successful, and be able to care for their family, not only here in Lacey, but you know, across our nation. And so, you know, it has been a tough time, but I luckily have, you know, great people that we can turn to. I've had some good conversations during this time. And what I've learned is that we need to continue to talk to each other. You know, this is the one time we need to continue this conversation. We can't just, you know, be mad and demand something and where that never happens, and then start going on with our lives. We have to take this moment and understand what can we do as a community. And first of all, it starts with recognizing inequities where they exist, and then coming together as a community to solve it. Government cannot solve all this. This isn't all about the police. This isn't all about the city of Lacey. This means every one of us has a responsibility to take a look at the inequities we have and try to get rid of them. And right. So, and I'm, you know, during these conversations that I had, that conversation with Councilmember Miller, that was hard to believe that's happened right here in Lacey. And I'd like Councilmember Miller to talk about that for a second.
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about that. First, I want to say thanks to Chief for, you know, not only implementing programs, but making sure that they actually happen out on the street. Because when the adrenaline starts running and pumping and everything like that, and you're trying to, you know, get somebody in some handcuffs or whatever, you're right, things can spiral out of control. And things can end up, you know, another statistic and another national story, but that's not what's happening here, and I'm very happy about that. Now, I do not get a lot of complaints about the Lacey Police Department, and so you know, to say that, you know what, hey, we are willing to step back, reassess the situation, and find a tactic that works, that's safe for everybody, safe for the person, you know, who's going into handcuffs, potentially safe for the officers, safe for the establishment, and you guys are able to have success with that, and the numbers really show the success that you guys have with that. I've had some experiences, not with the police here, but just, you know, I've lived in Lacey for Since 2001, I moved down from Seattle, and as a lot of you guys know, I am a residential mortgage loan officer, and I spend my day helping people buy homes. And as a loan officer, your main job is to get out in the streets and talk to realtors, because what happens in the real estate industry is when people want to buy a house, the first thing they do is they go talk to a real estate agent. And they tell the real estate agent, hey, I saw this house and your name was on it and I want to buy that house. And the real estate agent first says, well, are you approved for financing? Or are you going to pay cash for this house? You're going to write a check, or are you going to get a loan? And if they say, oh, we're going to need some financing, then they send them to a loan officer. And then the loan officer approves that person, sends them back to the realtor with, the $500,000 that they need. And then, they put in an offer and so on and everything. And they get to the closing table. And that's the way the business goes. As a loan officer, your job is to get out there and, convince realtors that you're the guy for the job. You're the guy who can get the deals closed. And so, I started being a loan officer here in 2001. I've been in banking since 97. So in the last 20 years, and I did take a little break when the market got crazy and went and worked for the military for a little while. But in all my time here as a loan officer in the city of Lacey, I've knocked on every real estate shop door in this county and the next county and some of the ones in the county after that. Saying, hey, you know what, I'm the best at what I do. I'll get your deals closed. And one of the story that I shared with the mayor was this: in all those 20 years that I've been a loan officer, last month I got my first deal from a white guy realtor. Okay, after 20 years, I got my first referral from a white guy realtor. And it was a shock to me. I was surprised. And, during those 20 years, it's not like I didn't knock on the doors. I did. I went out there and asked for the business. I just wasn't really getting it. And I chalked it up to all kinds of different things. People want to do business that, with people that look like them, or people that, maybe they just don't want to do business with me, whatever the case may be. But, there's a feeling of, being marginalized during those times. You have to persevere through it, power through it. Would this be happening in a different circumstance? If I was somebody else, if I was a white guy, and would they do business with me? If I was a white female, would they do business with me? The fact of the matter is that it didn't happen for 20 years, no matter, as hard as I tried. And so that is a piece of what we're talking about. That is a significant piece, because I'll give you another example. I have a friend. He owns a paint company, and he said, Malcolm, when this whole thing started, 3 months ago, I got a call from him last month, maybe 3 weeks ago, and he's like, hey, how you dealing with this, so on and so forth. And I said, I'm dealing with it. It's if I saw this coming years and years ago. And he said, we had a little conversation and we talked for a while. He was able to tell me, he said, Malcolm, when I send guys out to paint a house, I always send white guys out, because there's a likelihood that I'm going to get some additional business. That's what people want to see when they, when I send workers out to their house. So, it's not that I don't want to hire Latino or Black people. It's just that it's better for my business if I hire the white guys. And I was shocked. I thought maybe I was the only person who was feeling like, in order to get some business or get some referrals, you need to look like the people that you're trying to get business from. And even though that's starting to change now a little bit, that's the way it's been for a very long time. And so I'm glad we're having these conversations, because this is actually only the third time that I've actually told anybody about this. I've never said anything to anybody about this.
And I really appreciate that conversation that you and I had, Malcolm, about, and first of all, I couldn't believe it was true, right? Because I think part of it is that we're so insulated here in Lacey, and I have this perception of how I think we are here. And the fact that these biases still exist, right here, right with our own council member, it's hard to explain, and which means we have more work to do, right? And when it comes to bias, it's something that everyone has, and yet do we put in the work to recognize it? Because a lot of these unconscious biases are just that, they're unconscious. And unless you really, talk about it, really think on it, you can just go through your daily lives and it never be discussed. And so that's why I think it's important that you shared that story. And I think it's important that we're having this conversation right now with the rest of this community, because I guarantee you there's people who think there's no way, not in Lacey, not in Thurston County, could there be any sort of bias like this. Well, yes, there can be. And so we all need to do better.
Well, and I think that's what feels different this time is, I mean, we see this happening over and over. And like you said, Mayor, you sit there for a minute and you think about it and you're like, gosh, that's terrible. And then you just kind of move on with your day. But this just feels different and it's needed. There's so many people, so many Black people sharing their stories, just as Councilmember Miller did, that are so eye-opening and so impactful to me as a white person who I don't experience those same injustices in my life. There is a great amount of privilege that I was just born into because of the color of my skin. And because there's so much education happening right now, conversations that, intentional conversations that people are having and entering into that maybe they feel really uncomfortable. I was super nervous for this conversation, but it needs to happen. And I think our Black community is really receptive to that. They've been very accommodating and gracious and answer questions. And I hope that it continues and that it needs to continue. And I think that this is just the beginning of conversations for us. I see more of this, more things like this happening.
Well, and I think that sort of leads us into the next question that everyone has right now is, what are we going to do? What's the next step?
Right.
And first, I think, again, I'm proud of the fact that I think we are well positioned here in Lacey to continue to have these conversations. It's been even a while back, I've been having a conversation with our city manager on how do we reach out and have better conversations with the people of color in our community, more of our minorities within our community. And that really led to pulling together what was a civic leaders group to start to have some of these conversations. We first came up with the idea of let's put together a diversity cooks event where everyone can share a traditional meal and have a conversation, not only about the food, but about what's going on in their lives here in Lacey, and just to start the conversations. That group met and we started looking at, well, that's great to talk, but what else can we do? And we are just about ready to meet again. And of course, COVID-19 happened and everything's been paused. But when all this, all this heartache has hit our country, we made sure to reconvene this group, and we will be meeting actually tomorrow to have the conversation again, and to just listen and learn and hear from our community. I think that's one thing that is so important right now, is to sit down and have the conversations.
Yeah.
To hear what's going on, instead of this being sort of a top down, this is what we need to do, is really to hear and listen and react and adjust to what needs to happen. And that's what this group is about. we're going to have more of a focus on equity. And so we're going to actually, probably look to change the name to the Civic Leaders Council on Equity. So we're going to be meeting, like I said, tomorrow, and I really look forward to continuing that conversation.
Mayor, how were the members of that group chosen?
Well, we just reached out at the beginning for the group is we reached out to as many different groups as we possibly could, and to find members who'd be interested to come and have these conversations. Scott, do you want to talk a little bit about how we went through that process?
Yeah, I think initially we just wanted to, if we're going to have community, people can't be left out of the community. And so we wanted to make sure that we are reaching out to anyone that we felt that was unrepresented. And so we reached out to the Hispanic Roundtable. And so we have representation from the Hispanic Roundtable. We reached out to the faith-based organizations. And so we do have African-American communities representing the Baptist churches at the table. Also Asian Americans. And so we have a representative from St. Martin's University to basically, share their experiences. And also we reached out to the Islamic Center. As you know, they've been also the face of discrimination here, obviously in the last really since 2001 with 9/11. And so that was really the impetus, and we're trying to make that a larger group. But again, we were in the midst of kind of forming that group, and then COVID-19 sort of put a pause on that. But again, I think it just now more than ever, we need to ignite that group and start having these conversations. And one thing I just wanted to mention, just made me think of when Councilman was sharing his story. I think we all feel like Lacey's different because we don't have, I'd say, overt racism. And when I think of overt racism, I think of the South. And, fortunate to work with former Mayor Clarkson, who would tell me stories growing up in the 50s and having segregated bathrooms and hard to imagine living in an environment like that. But then when you hear stories about, Councilmember Miller having a different form of discrimination, maybe not as overt, but I think we recognize it's just as destructive of that type of discrimination. I think that's why it's important to have these sort of communications and recognition of, what do we need to do to kind of acknowledge that and kind of move forward as a community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Councilmember Miller, did you have anything to add to that as far as kind of addressing moving forward? Is there something that you would like to see from members of the community?
Yeah, first I want to say, during the first 10 years that I was here, if it wasn't for the church, I wouldn't have made it as a loan officer at all. That's where most of my business ended up coming from, is from the church. But secondly, moving forward, honestly, to the citizens of Lacey, and I want to make sure that I say this right, but let's say, for example, you have Black friends, right? And you talk to them, and most of your conversation is probably surface level stuff. But if you've ever asked them, let me back up. They probably have never told you what it's really like being Black in America. They probably have never been 100% honest with you because it's something that we don't really talk about much, but if they trust you, they will tell you. So don't be afraid to ask. Ask them, would you mind telling me the truth of what it's really like being Black in America for you?
Mm-hmm.
And see if they'll tell you. They may have to give them time to think about it. Seriously. Give them time to think about it, give them a minute to process that. And they're probably gonna, weigh in on whether they really feel they can trust to tell you this kind of thing. But give them a chance, but ask them, and then that is gonna lead to the conversations that you guys have never, ever had before, ever. And you're gonna know your friend in a different way if you would take a bold enough step to do that. I promise you.
Yeah. And that is the place that we need to get to being intentional and real with those people in our lives and the resources that we have. So thank you, Councilmember Miller, for sharing your story and your perspective. Every time I get to be a part of those conversations, it helps me grow and it helps me learn. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And I'd also just like to add, as far as moving forward and what needs to change in order to really see change happen. I do feel strongly that, it is conversations. I feel like this movement, this energy is really going to get passed on to the next generation. And that is where we're going to see some big changes coming. And I know for myself, I take that responsibility seriously. I have hard conversations with my kids who are younger, and they're, how old are they? 10 and 12. So conversations I didn't think that I would need to have with them at this age, or honestly, probably never would have approached that subject. But so yeah, I've appreciated the opportunity to learn and grow. And I just wanted to give anybody else, we've got several questions to go over. So anybody joining us through Zoom, if you have any questions for our panel, feel free to post those. We do have the ones listed that came in during registration, so I will get to those as well. But before we kind of go to questions, does anybody have anything that they would like to share or final thoughts? Or maybe we can do that after questions.
Let's go to questions.
Yeah, sounds good. So I will go to the first one that came in during registration. It says, will there be a move to non-law enforcement responses, such as the use of social service rapid response teams? So Chief, I will let you, sorry, Mary.
Yeah, go ahead, Chief, and I'll follow up with that.
So currently we use a service navigator to facilitate that non-enforcement response. So we've kind of started down that road. We have a service navigator who's a non-law enforcement entity embedded with our officers to go out and do homeless encounters to try to meet up homeless folks with services and get them off the street, frankly, and get them housed, which is our ultimate goal. Now, there's opportunities to kind of branch out from that model, but we've been proving for the last year that going actually works really well. We've had a lot of success with that. So we're working towards those rapid response models, but it's going to take a bit to figure out what that looks like and how that best works for both the safety of the social service responder and what's appropriate for them to respond to, and how do we train them up to do that, and how do we empower them to be successful. Mary?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a model that will hopefully take some more pressure off of our police. One thing that I think we all should know, that we are asking our police departments to do way too much. Every sort of societal ill that we have right now, it's the police department's responsibility to try to solve it. And I think the more that we've had to ask our police, the more difficult you have with interactions with people when shouldn't be their responsibility. And so I think we're seeing this movement happen across the United States, and I welcome it. We should be having homeless coordinators go out and have conversations. We should, have, other opportunities where there's less crime that happens within our community that the police don't have to respond to. And so I think some of this is sort of reimagining our law enforcement and what does that look like? I mean, I'm sure the police wouldn't like to respond to less crime. And that means that as a community, what can we do so there's less crime that's happening? Making sure that people have jobs, have affordable housing, have access to transportation, all these things that sort of results in conflict that we have to ask the police to get involved in. We should be focusing on those things that will provide less conflict within our communities.
Great, thank you to both of you for that. Moving on to the next one, it says, thoughts on increasing the diversity pipeline for those running for city council?
I'll jump in on that. First of all, running for city council, I can speak from my own experience, but it's a position that requires, I won't say it requires a lot of your time, but it requires your schedule to be really flexible. And so if I didn't have, a job where I can come and go as I want or as I need, I probably wouldn't be able to do it. I would not be a viable candidate for it. And so that's probably the number one thing. But, when running, you need, to have a strong team around you. I was actually asked to run. I did not in any way think of myself as, oh, I'm going to be on the council one day or a mayor one day or anything like that. None of it. Somebody asked me to run and I said, you got the wrong guy. You're barking up the wrong tree and you need to move on and talk to somebody else. And he just kept being persistent about it. So I said, you know what, fine, I'll pray about it. And I did. And I decided that I was going to do it. But, in terms of diversity for city council, I honestly believe that it is one of my duties before the end of this 4 years to motivate the next group of people, to motivate, some more minorities to get into government positions. And one of the reasons why I took this position, because you can't complain about the circumstances and situations if an opportunity comes for you to make a change and you shrink back. Okay. Then, so when the opportunity came, I've voiced opinions about some things, or maybe I haven't voiced opinions, but I've had opinions about some things. I'm not really into voicing a whole lot of opinion or, trying to sway people to my side. But when the opportunity came, what kind of hypocrite would I have been if I said, oh, no, that's for somebody else, which I tried to do, by the way. And so do I see the pipeline for those running to be more diverse in the future? Absolutely. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why I even did this. Another big reason is because I used to run into Virgil Clarkson all the time at the MLS breakfast. It's a real estate event every Tuesday morning, and all the people go and have breakfast together, and you go in there and you try to network with people and try to get some business. And I would go in there on Tuesday mornings and I would see Virgil. And at the time I first met him, he was a deputy mayor, and years later he was the mayor, and so on and so forth. And I thought, you know what, maybe there's a shot for me in this. When I reflected back to those times when I was asked to run, I thought, well, Virgil did it, and he was on council for like 16 years. It's a lot of times it's easier to see yourself in a position if you've seen somebody like you in that position.
Right.
Okay. There's no escaping that. And so when we talk about diversity, we talk about, can you see yourself into that position? People, Black Panther came out and all of a sudden every Black kid could see themselves as a superhero. Well, they didn't have that option before, Blade. Anyway, so when you can see yourself in that position, and if you're, if mentally you're strong enough to see yourself in a position and that person in that position doesn't look like you, has never looked like you, more power to you. But some people need to see somebody that looks like them in that position in order for this thing to work for them. And so
I just want to let everyone know that there are so many ways you can get involved in your local government that can give you some stepping stones to become an elected official. We have several commissions and committees. We have our planning commission, which really does the bulk of our work when it comes to ordinances, doing the deep dives on that, getting all the background information, and then they present and options to the council for consideration. There's our historic commission. If you love history, especially in Lacey, you can get involved in the historic commission. There's our parks board. We have one of the best parks systems and the best park system in Thurston County. So there are opportunities for you to get involved in your local government. And it's been something I've always been trying to do, is to have more diversity on those committees. And so please, if you're listening to this right now and you're interested, apply for these openings that come up on our boards and commissions.
Right. And those boards and commissions, those types of groups that you just mentioned, Mayor, those are great. It's a great stepping stone into council. It gives you a really good overview and a good look at what city government is all about, and it gets you more prepared for city council. So.
And then we always put those posts here on our Lacey, or on Facebook, our social media. We're doing more of that. It's on our website. But that's one of the things that were on my, my Mayor Andy Ryder page. I try to post them as much as possible when those come open. So yeah, please keep your eye out for that if you guys are interested.
And hopefully that is a positive step that we see as a result of this movement, these discussions, is more diversity on boards and commissions, council, to get a different representation of voice that is being heard. So thank you. Our next question says, with COVID budget constraints in mind, how proportional are the cuts to police to social services? Scott, do you have info on that?
Yeah, and I think it's probably a little more difficult to answer, but I would probably say generally it's about a 2-to-1 ratio. But understanding when we were dealing with impacts to our budget, which we took about $6.7 million, our goal really was to limit the impact it was going to have on the community in terms of service, and then also try to keep the integrity of the organization and avoid layoffs and as much furloughs as possible. But in general, there was almost about $500,000 taken out of the police department, and that was more of a delay in salaries because we have been difficulty hiring officers. And then we did take probably about $100,000 or $200,000 out of social services. But we're continuing to invest more money into social services as a city, just because we're dealing with more urban problems related to poverty. So to answer your question, about a 2-to-1 ratio.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Next question. Oh, Mayor, it sounds like you answered this in your discussion, but it says, when will the new Civic Leadership Group on Equity have its first meeting? And you mentioned tomorrow. So
we're meeting tomorrow, and like I mentioned before, this has been a group that has just been some civic leaders getting together to talk. I think the discussion that we'll have tomorrow is will it be a more formal part of our city, and what will their role be? And I think we really need to ask the question from the civic leaders so far who've been participating, is what role would they like to have, and what could they see coming out of using them when it comes to issues around equity in our city of Lacey government. So we're still at the beginning stages of this, but at least we have the group sort of formed. I think we can open it up to a few more people and continue to have those conversations.
Yeah, and I think it's important who should they contact if people want more information? Is this information going to be shared on our city website or through the city manager's office?
Right now it's through the city manager's office. This has been, like I said, it started off as a way of how do we improve our communication, and now with our Get the Times, I think there's going to be a little more focus on equity within our city, but it's still right now it's through the city manager's office.
Great. There is a question that came in that says, why has no action been taken regarding Councilmember Kunkel's Facebook post? So
obviously this has been a big issue over the past, I guess, a little over a week or so, whenever the post first came out. First of all, I want to say that, I've had the conversation with Councilmember Kunkel. I think most of our council has had a conversation. I think everyone maybe on our council has had a conversation with Councilmember Kunkel. And I think this is one of those big learning experiences where social media is one of those things where when you make a post, you might have an idea in your mind what you want that post to convey, but it's always open to interpretation. And in these couple circumstances, it created a response that a lot of people, I think, honestly felt extremely offended. And so, but this city council is independently elected. You know, we don't have the authority to limit someone's ability to write posts on social media. Ultimately, it's up to the voters to elect us and to see who's the best representatives for them on this council. So, you know, it's, I think, a big learning moment for Councilmember Kunkel, and he has apologized. And then, you know, now it's up to the community to continue to have these conversations.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so what are you doing to ensure that police misconduct isn't being covered up as it is in so many places?
Well, I think this again goes back to all the accountability. Again, it's really difficult to see what you see on national television and not wonder if it's happening right here at home. But as it's been pointed out, we already have a lot of the measures that are in place that other communities are really demanding on their police departments that haven't implemented, you know, these policies. And so, and I was just on a phone call with other mayors and council members from across the United States, and it's amazing how many police departments have not implemented, you know, these things that we have already done well before this incident. And so it just goes to show you that that accountability, responsibility that we all have as a community, that our police have taken to heart because they're a part of our community, is special. It's one of the reasons why I believe, you know, we've been recognized as one of the top places to live in the United States. There are only 2 cities in Washington State that was recognized, and Lacey was one of them. And there's a reason behind that, and our police is a big part of that.
Yeah, I'd just add, I mean, when you talk about corruption in police, I mean, that kind of goes at the very heart of the integrity of our law enforcement professionals. And again, I have a lot of faith in our Lacey Police Department. As the city manager, ultimately, I'm accountable to make sure the oversight of the city police force as well as the chief. Plus, you have the elected body of the city council and the community. I mean, there are a lot of checks and balances to ensure that, again, that our law enforcement professionals, our police officers, the men and women, are acting in accordance with the laws and the Constitution of the United States. So I think that's important just to point that out.
Okay, we will go to a couple that have just come in recently. So one comment says, the mayor said we don't have, quote, overt racism in Lacey, but I'm not so sure. Does Councilmember Miller agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I honestly, I haven't seen a lot of it myself, but you know, I am not a little dude. So people are not that I have yet to somebody to come up to me, at least not while I was living here in Lacey, and, you know, spout off some racist crap to me. And so I haven't had to deal with it, but I've heard that, yes, but I heard it from, the person I heard it from was 115-pound female. She was a woman. And she said, you know, it exists because I've been called the N-word right here in Lacey, you know, by my neighbor. And so I think what happens is, you know, racists tend to go after what they think as somebody who is weak and who will not stand up to them and defend themselves. And so does it exist? I've heard it exists. Has somebody come up to me and used overt racism? No, they haven't. But so I hate to give you a yes and no answer, but that's the only answer I have for you.
And so, I think that was our city manager that says they didn't think there was overt racism. I think there is racism everywhere, unfortunately, in every community across the United States. I'm sure there is, right? I think, unfortunately, racism is been a part of this country from the beginning, and we have never completely dealt with it. And it has to go again with so many different inequities we have within our system. And people say, oh, we haven't had them recently. There are still systemic issues of inequality that have been in our communities that we have never quite dealt with. If you look at the accumulation of wealth and who's accumulated the majority of the wealth in this country over the years, it has not gone to people of color. If you look at redlining that has happened, that was sponsored by our federal government to ensure loans for houses, right here in this community was affected by redlining. Our federal highway system, when it was developed, went through mostly neighborhoods of color that wiped out housing across the United States for people, mostly people of color. So yeah. Our government has been a part of it, and we're still feeling the effects. So I don't think for a second that there hasn't been. I say we don't necessarily see it as much as in your case right here in Lacey, but we still feel the effects of it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that information, Mayor, because that's a lot of the information that I have seen and read about and watched videos on that is just really eye-opening. So thank you for that honesty and just recognizing that, because I think that is going to be part of the solution, is recognizing it, admitting that it is where we live, and then we can start to take action to correct our behavior.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
By the way, that was that was not a challenge to come up and say something overtly racist to me. Okay,
note to everybody watching.
But I agree with what Andy's saying, with what the mayor's saying. Anytime you have to make laws to make sure that just to try to level the playing field, it's there and it exists, because legislation is not made on a whim.
Absolutely, thank you. So moving on to we've got several more. This one says, when will the city be open? So I'm assuming that is referring to City Hall, and City Hall will be open in phase 3. It will look a little different, but somebody correct me if I'm misspeaking, but tomorrow I believe the county is going to be applying for to be approved to move into phase 3. So hopefully that gets approved, and maybe by the end of the week or early next week, we will see those changes. Scott, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I just add, you're right. The county is going to apply for phase 3 under the governor's Reopen Washington plan. Those are typically approved if they meet the qualifications within about 24 hours. So that means we potentially could have our city facilities back open to the public on Monday. In consideration of COVID and social distancing, though, we will probably have a modified schedule. So that first week would probably be a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and have hours closer to a 10 to 5, just so we can make sure that our employees are safe, and also to communicate to the public that there are a lot of alternative means to pay for services or get the same services online, or alternative means. So again, we just want to make sure that people can go into our facilities safe and not actually have too many people in the lobby, those type of issues like passports or utility buildings. So we'll be encouraging a lot of appointment-based services in that first couple of weeks.
Great, thank you for expanding on that, Scott. Next comment or question says, I'm concerned with the pie chart that indicates persons of colors being arrested based on, quote, description. How many of those arrests result in convictions?
That's funny. I was just typing to Ms. Harris, who asked that question.
Oh, okay.
I didn't need to answer it online or today because I need to go look for the answer, frankly.
Oh.
I can tell you the vast majority of people we arrest either are held account for the warrant that they're arrested for, or they're held to answer for the charges that they're being pressed. The majority of our cases are some type of larceny or theft, shoplifting from a local retailer, those type of things. So what I'll do is I'll investigate that, and then I'll post it under our accountabilities measure to let you know what our conviction rate is.
Perfect. Thank you, Chief. Okay, so there are some comments here. Let me just check the live Q&A. Let's see. So one question says, will you reinstitute the youth police advisory boards and the community advisory boards, which once met monthly with the chief, requiring the chief and not a delegate?
You have to forgive me. I started as deputy chief in October, and then COVID hit, and then I became the chief of police in May.
Right.
So I'm still learning about all the boards, commissions that were pre-COVID, and I'm looking forward to maintaining all those relationships and listening to all input from the community. So I don't look at stopping anything we've been doing on a regular basis. And in fact, I'm looking forward to getting out the community more as COVID allows.
Great.
Do we add to that, Gene? I know in the past,
Great.
we had the Chiefs Roundtable, and previous chiefs had invited basically the community to come and get updates from the chief and also from different police officers. And over time, some of those meetings just low attendance, and so they basically paused. But again, I think it's any time that there's more participation and communication with the police department, that's encouraged. And so I'm sure we're looking at obviously other ways that we can make sure we're communicating with the public, especially in this time.
Great. Okay, well, I think we have gone through all of the questions. There's some comments that our council members and mayor staff can read through. But are there any final thoughts that anybody would like to leave with?
I guess I'd just like to, thank the community for listening to this conversation and for, being a part of the solution, which is to continue to have these conversations. I think we have a lot of work to do. As I mentioned, even with COVID, it has shown that there's a lot of inequities within our system. When we are looking at, Lacey was such a great place to do business. Maybe we need to recognize our minority-owned businesses, and we can do better at that. I would like to know, all of our minority-owned businesses in Lacey, and I know some of that has started to happen. So I just want to thank the community for being a part of this conversation and making Lacey just the wonderful place it is.
I want to thank the community too. I've been here for about 20 years, and I felt very embraced here. And even though business-wise, I didn't really feel that I was getting my just due there, but that's starting to turn around. It's a complex issue, with racism, and it's oftentimes tough to talk about, because when you're irritated about it, you shut down, you don't really want to talk, but if you're on the other side of it, how do you approach that conversation? And so if that's where you are, I encourage you to be brave and be bold, and just ask, start the conversation and see if it will lead to a place that will give you some deeper understanding about the people around you, and what African Americans, what minorities go through just to live, just to try to be a part of the bigger picture. So if I can encourage you in doing anything, I would encourage you to do that. And thank you for voting for us, for me. You know what I mean? It's a paradox, because on one side I have the situation where I'm like, okay, it's tough getting some business here and so on and so forth, but it's starting to come around. On the other side, I think I got 40-something% of the vote.
Yeah.
And so I think about that at night. I literally lay there thinking about it. Okay, you don't want to do business with me, but you'll vote for me. Or and in your mind, that's how you think about it. That's just the raw portion of it. But the fact of the matter is that there are a lot of people here in Lacey who really care about the minority community, and it shows when they show up and vote. And so I would encourage people, hey, get involved. There's plenty of committees for you to join. There's plenty of places, stepping stones for you to get in and start making a difference, if you're willing to spend the time to do it.
Great. Thank you, both of you. And I mentioned it earlier, but this has been a really great conversation. I thank all of you for giving your time today, giving your heartfelt opinions. And I see the chief raising his hand. Yes.
I have to echo what the mayor and Councilmember Miller said earlier. The Lacey Police Department enjoys a great deal of support from the community. I'm very appreciative of that. The letters of support, the emails of support, the donuts, the cookies, and all the things that have been coming are very much appreciated, especially during these times, and the words of support and kindness to my officers. I really appreciate that. And the questions that we get are great questions. They're just, the majority of the questions we get are asking for, hey, I see this in the news. What's it like here in Lacey? It's asking for clarification and transparency and how's my police department do policing? So we really appreciate those questions. We're really working to make sure those questions are answered. Ms. Harris, I'll make sure your question gets answered and posted to the site. I really appreciate the support from the community. I appreciate the support from the council, from the mayor, the city manager. And so from the entire police department, thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
The other thing that just comes to mind right before we leave is that, this has been such a divided nation for a while now. And it is really nice to be able to have conversations with people you don't normally have conversation with, especially during this time. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to not be shutting people out, but to trying to understand where they're coming from and have those conversations. That's why I said we can do better. We can always do better. We can be empathetic. We can understand where other people are coming from and try to learn from it. In this divided time, that changes by having civil conversations, and that's one of the reasons why every time when I close my meeting, I say keep it classy, Lacey, because we need that now more than ever, not only on our politics, but in our conversations with one-on-one. We have to continue to respect each other and respect people's difference of opinions, disagree wholeheartedly sometimes, but respect where other people are coming from and continue those conversations. It always drives me crazy when you see I'm going to shut this person out of my life forever. No, you need to engage that person now more than ever to have the conversations that we all need to have.
Absolutely. Very well said, Mayor. Thank you for those thoughts. I think that's a great way to end our conversations today. This is just the beginning, I think, for us. I can see more conversations like this happening with different members of our community, just to hear more perspectives and hear more voices. So I think our citizens can expect that from us. Absolutely. So again, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Miller, for joining us. Scott and Chief, thank you both for your time today. And to everybody listening, if you missed part of this or you want to see, get any information on replay, you can always find it on our social media accounts. So thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lacey.